Welcome back. All right, so last time talking about deal structuring instruments, we covered senior debt, we covered preferred equity, and we covered common equity. And in this video, we're going to cover the two things that are in between, and this is subordinated debt and we've got quasi equity. All right, so let's start by talking about subordinated debt. Subordinated debt is like the same as senior debt, except for it gets paid second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. It's lower down on the capital stack than number one. That's pretty much the only difference between senior debt and subordinated debt. That, and you can't enforce covenants in subordinated debt. You can enforce covenants in senior debt, but not subordinated debt. Remember, covenants are rules saying if you break this set of rules, then I want my money back. You can't say that if you're subordinated. You can't just pull your money out because there's people that are ahead of you in line. Senior debt can have covenants. They can say, hey, you break these set of rules, I'm out, all right? That's one of the major differences between subordinated debt and senior debt. Another major difference is that because you're taking on more risk in the case of liquidation, typically you can charge a higher interest rates for subordinated debt. So senior debt is the cheapest. This is the cheapest type of debt for the person that you're investing in, right? Subordinated debt is then like the second cheapest. So that's some of the major differences. You take on more risk in the case of liquidation, but you get paid more percentage by being in second, third, or fourth, or fifth, or whatever place behind the number one debtor. Now, if you're going to give subordinated debt, you better make sure that there's enough of this stuff below you in order to cover you in case of default, right? Because if you give subordinated debt and for some reason they're going into a liquidation, you better make sure that there's enough money that trickles down to you in order to cover you. And obviously, like the last person who's going to get covered are the actual owners, like the common equity and then preferred equity and then quasi equity, okay? So this is the capital stack right here. These five get paid in order, right? This is number one and this is number five. So what is quasi equity? First of all, let's just define quasi. Quasi means like appears as equity. So quasi-equity has some equity characteristics, but it also has some debt characteristics. Now, there's three big tools that we're going to cover with quasi-equity, okay? The first one is a participating loan. Now, participating loans, there's two definitions of this, so don't get it confused with the other definition. The other definition that we're not talking about means like when someone's giving out a big loan, you can kind of like put money into that loan and participate and be one of the lenders, right? That's not what we're discussing. This definition of participating loan, what this means is that you get, let's say a flat rate of interest. So let's say you're going to get like 5% flat rate of interest. But if things go really well, then you also get a variable interest rate that increases with the profitability of the company. So if things are going really well, then you go up to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12% interest rate. And the terms of what exactly that looks like is completely up to you to decide. Now, we're not going to be talking much about participating loans because this is too complex of a structure. People don't really use it in emerging markets because not everybody understands it. It's kind of hard to set up. It's like, if we meet this much in profitability, then I get paid this much. And it's just not really used. And so if you try to bring this up to your partner and say, hey, I want to do a participating loan, they're going to be like, dude, what is that? Like, are you making this up? Is this even legally enforceable? There's a whole bunch of, question marks that'll happen if you try to do a participating loan. If you want to do quasi-equity, which by the way, this right here is money. This is the sweet spot. This is my preferred sweet spot. Now, remember, this is my personal opinion. It's not legal advice, yada, yada. But I want to play around personally in this quasi-equity space because this is where there's uneven risk and reward, right? you get some characteristics of debt. You basically get the best of debt and the best of equity. The debt is like the security, but the best of equity is like the potential upside, right? The second type of quasi-equity is convertible debt. Now, convertible debt is an amazing tool. I've used this personally before in the past to raise money for one of my businesses, because you're basically saying is like, hey, you're going to give me a loan, right? Or I'm going to give you a loan. And let's say I'm going to just charge, for this loan, this is actually the example I did. I'm going to give you a 2-year loan. I was actually the borrower in this case. I'm going to give you a 2-year loan, and I'm going to pay you, 10% per year after 2 years. I'm going to give you that money. But let's say that the business does really well. I'm going to give you the option to turn that loan into equity of equal value, right? So I'll give you, equity for whatever that loan was worth. You can also predetermine how much equity you want, right? Basically what this is called is bond. It's a bond with a warrant. And a warrant is basically the same word as like a stock option. So it's like I have the option to, in the future, purchase this stock at a previously predetermined price. Okay? So in the future, I have the option to buy into equity at the starting price of when equity costed way back then. How powerful is that? It's like, worst case scenario, you're a debtor. Worst case scenario, you do fall below subordinated debt, right? But what if there is no subordinated debt? What if there is no senior debt? In this case, if there's only quasi-equity, if there's only convertible debt, and there's only common equity, you're number one. Let's just say in a scenario where there is none of this stuff, you get paid back first using convertible debt at a set interest rate. So at a very minimum, I'm going to make 10% or whatever it is that I negotiate on the deal. At a very minimum, but at a best case scenario, I get to participate just like these common equity guys do. I get to buy that. I get to just turn the money that I gave into debt into equity upon a triggering event. So you get to mitigate your risk. It's like, hey, I'm going to get paid first, right? But I also don't want to be left out of the upside. And so that's what's so awesome about convertible debt. I am a huge fan of convertible debt. I use this when I was raising money for a business, and we didn't know how much equity was going to be worth. We had no idea. Yeah, like the projections, I always tell people, like, projections when you're a seed business are just a bunch of baloney, right? They're all just like hockey stick graphs. Everyone knows that that's not actually going to come true, or it's not likely to come true. So we just said, you know what? We want to give you equity. We're going to offer equity in the future. We know we're going to have to raise equity, but we have no idea what a good equity trade would be. So instead of just giving you a random amount of equity for a random amount of business that we don't actually know what it's worth, we will just give you a convertible debt. We'll give you a convertible debt, so you can either just pull out and just take your money out if you think the business isn't doing well, or you can convert this into equity in the future when we start actually selling shares of equity. That's the power of convertible debt. It is such a powerful tool. It's one of the best tools in the toolbox. And the only thing that I like more than convertible debt is this thing called mezzanine debt. So mezzanine, also known as mezz debt. By the way, subordinated debt is also known as sub debt. But mezzanine debt, this is the most flexible of all of the quasi-equity tools. It's the most flexible tool in order to do a deal, period. And the way that this works, it's a lot like convertible debt, but it's much more malleable. So here's an example. There's two really awesome characteristics about mezzanine debt that make it so attractive. It's very much like convertible debt. But the first thing is that upon convertible debt, which, by the way, convertible debt, I forgot to mention, can be triggered automatically. So you could set it as like, hey, if the business does, this well or more, I automatically want to convert to equity. Or there can be a warrant, right? So that's the option to trigger it. So the mezzanine debt, when you hit that triggering event, you can pull your money out. But instead of, pulling your money out and just, done with the deal, everything, like my money's out, we hit the triggering event, it converted to equity or to cash, because convertible debt can also turn into cash. Mezzanine debt, you can be done with the deal, you can take your money out, but you can also negotiate that you get future share of profits. You can structure this so that upon the triggering event that would convert you to either equity or to cash, you can say, hey, you know what, I'm done with this deal, but then you can still collect checks for 2 years, 3 years, some finite amount of time after the deal is done, after the triggering event, because you're not a common equity holder. You don't just get to, cash out on this deal forever. But you can say for 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to pay me 20% of profits for helping you get off the ground with mezzanine debt. That's pretty freaking cool. I don't have my money in there, but I'm still collecting my profits. So mezzanine debt is a super cool type of financing. And it's really cool, secondly, because it's very flexible. Now, this is good for you and it's good for your partner, okay? It's almost like there's no rules when it comes to mezzanine debt. And of course, I'm exaggerating there. It's a little bit of a hyperbole. But let's say that you need to structure a deal where the first 2 years, you know that your partner's going to have a really rough first 2 years. And you can say, you know what? You won't pay me anything in the first 2 years. I know that you're not going to have the money to pay me. You won't pay me principal. You won't pay me interest, nothing. After 2 years, you start paying me interest. And then after 4 years, you pay me 50% of the principal. After 6 years, I want the other 50% of the principal. And then for 6 years to 10 years out, you're going to pay me, in addition to the interest that I started charging, you're going to pay me a cut of the profits. Mezzanine debt's so flexible. You can organize mezzanine debt however you want. And because you get to say, hey, you know what, I want a cut of the profits, I want it to be, convertible to equity or convertible to cash, or, after I pull my money out, I still want, the upside of the profits. I mean, you can do so much with mezzanine debt. So this right here, the quasi equity, this is where Wall Street rebels, I recommend, play around. Now, preferred equity is a lot like that too, because preferred equity, in fact, these are like very similar, right? Because preferred equity, you can say, hey, I want minimum 10% payments, but I'm also, an equity stakeholder, and so I want some of the upside. A lot like convertible debt. You can get a very similar result between preferred equity and the quasi equity. But preferred equity isn't legal in every country. There's some countries that say you can only have so much preferred equity as a percentage of the total amount of equity in the business. So this is your full toolbox, though. You've got a capital stack, 5 people get paid in this order. If you're quasi-equity, you get paid in the middle. But like I said, think about this. This is a little precursor to what's coming in the future. Think about if there is none of this stuff, right? If there's none of that, you can be number one in line. You can be number one in line with quasi-equity and preferred equity. And you can say, hey, you know what, partner? I want you to put in common equity, okay? And I'm going to put in convertible debt. And at the end of the day, if you do a good job, then I'm going to convert to equity, and we're going to end up splitting this, with whatever split we want. But if you do a bad job, then I am going to get paid first with the cash that you put into the deal. And that makes them put skin in the game. So these structuring instruments, I mean, this stuff gives me the goosebumps. I love talking about this because this is what you can do in order to create a really awesome deal. In this playground right here, this quasi-equity, you can structure some really awesome deals with uneven risk and reward, where you can get, just as much reward with less risk because you're higher up on the capital stack. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.